Not a lot of cases out on elections being stolen, especially a presidential election. That's kind of unique. There was a case in 1976 and in Donahue versus State Board of Voting Examiners or voters in New York. 1976, the court said that anybody who's going to set aside an election, especially a presidential election, has a very great burden. And they have to prove by clear and convincing evidence, and that's a standard that's almost as high as reasonable doubt. But we have, in this case, have to establish by clear and convincing evidence that one, there is illegal tampering in the election, and two, that it had an effect, it had an outcome. So, and the reason is, if there's no harm, there's no foul. But in this instance, where you have so much involvement from Russia in trying to affect the voting machines and trying to affect the information that people were getting, there had to have been a lot of votes that were changed. I mean, that would be silly to say otherwise. And also, Vladimir Putin is not going to waste a lot of money and a lot of time and energy on something that would have no effect. So we have that as a burden in the case law that exists out there, and that's why we have to prove those 2 points.
I would just like to start by reading a letter that Brent Turner wrote to Admiral Rogers at the NSA. And he sent this email actually this morning. And it says, "Dear Admiral Rogers, thank you for your service. Previously, you stated that you had no evidence regarding Russian interference with the actual vote counts. Has there been, to your knowledge, any forensic analyses conducted on the voting machines in any states?" And I'm going to stop there because Brent is here with us. He can explain better. And I'm going to ask you, Brent Turner, the claim that although everyone agrees that Russia, a foreign power, invaded our election system, what do you say about the additional claim that the election results were not overturned or altered by that invasion?
If the systems were affected, we can only go by the evidence that is in place, which is that there was tampering with the systems, and that we know that the exit polls were off, and we know that human nature is such, if a criminal is given access to a system and they are focused on manipulating that system, it would make sense that they manipulated the essence of the system, not just the surrounding pieces. So, this is what the conversation is really about. And I think what your court case is about is saying, since we know human nature and we know that there was vulnerability, can we conclude that since the intruders were inside the systems, that they manipulated the crucial parts of the systems, or should we just think that they moderated themselves? Obviously, we don't think that they moderated themselves, so we're very suspicious that the tabulation was also affected, which is evidenced by the bad exit polls and the rest of the data. Brian Fox is one of my heroes. He is a fellow that is well known in computer science circles for his work, the creator of the Bash shell and many other accomplishments. We have had the pleasure of associating with Brian at the National Association of Voting Officials, and he was the person that the White House under President Obama referred to for their technology conversations surrounding election systems. So without further ado, I'll let Brian get into some of the more detailed circumstances around this issue. And if anybody wants to take a look at either of our bios, as well as Dr. Juan Gilbert, who is another one of our associates, that can be seen at navo-us.org. Thank you, Brian.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. That's exciting. There is a short video, if people are interested. There is a short video that has information about the anomalies that we believe took place during this 2016 presidential election cycle, which can be seen at myvoteismine.org, myvoteismine.org. So as everyone has pointed out here, it's been pretty clear from the intelligence community that the Russians did try to hack our election. In fact, succeeded in certainly spreading disinformation. They clearly succeeded in attacking various computer systems that we have, and the most recent information that we've seen was that they succeeded, or that they attempted to attack one of the manufacturers of the software that goes into the voting machines. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands the significance of that. People think that sometimes people believe that in order to hack the vote, you have to walk up to a voting machine, do a bunch of physical machinations to it, and make all that happen right during the actual election. And as the video explains, in fact, none of those things are necessarily so. You could modify the software that goes into the machine beforehand by specifically attacking the place where the software is made and making changes to that software. You could make even more nefarious changes by making changes to the process that turns what's called source code into the object code that goes into the machine. By changing the process, people who look at the source code wouldn't see that something's wrong. The process would then add in secret backdoors and deliver that software to the machine that's out there. In addition to that, you could modify the software on a single or a couple of voting machines in key swing states. You could do that modification during the primary, so you'd have a lot more time, and then have that modification actually become activated during the actual election. So I hope I've kind of explained why I'm so concerned about the integrity of our elections with the kind of civ-like voting systems that we have out there now.
So how confident are you, Brian, that you could, should, would? In this particular case, what kind of evidence do you have, or in addition to your gut instinct, that this election was altered?
Well, we looked at the results, and you'll hear pushback from this from various pundits out there, but we looked at the results of the exit polls versus the counts. And what we saw was that the difference between those two was much larger than was expected, specifically in the swing states, and also specifically in the areas where we expected to see extra strong Democratic support. Now, just so, I mean, I'm certain everybody understands how our electoral system works, but to kind of recap, let's say you have a state that has a pocket where people want to vote Democratic and many other precincts where people want to vote Republican. If you take that pocket where people want to vote Democratic and you alter some of the votes in that area, that pocket will still seem to have voted Democratic, but you've actually altered the total Republican count for the state, thus allowing the state to be a Republican state, and then the Electoral College will vote Republican. So, or vice versa, it could have gone either way. But what we saw was something that looked like that from the exit polls versus the actual counts. So we know specifically, for example, there was at least one machine, I think it was in Wisconsin, but I'm not positive. There was at least one machine which the day before the election had software upgraded on it, and the day after the election had software upgraded on it. That's a weird thing to have happen, a very strange thing to have happen.
So the question that you may have answered for yourself 100 times, so why are people out there in the media stating that there's no evidence? Why are people so determined to just tell us that even though the cat's out of the bag, no more doubt, not only that the election was invaded, but who did it? Why are they so insistent upon saying that the election was not changed?
Well, I can't speak for other people, but I can tell you what my conjecture is. My conjecture is that there's a very strong political effort to keep the confidence of the American people in our democratic process. Now, I believe in our democratic process, but I don't believe that our democratic process is being carried out the way I want it to be carried out. And that's the real issue. And I think that there's a pretty strong force to keep the masses happy and believing that democracy is working the way it's supposed to. Because otherwise we will have mass hysteria. And so even though you cannot tell whether this election was hacked without actually doing forensic analysis on all of the machines, no one has done that forensic analysis.
Wow. Wow.
And yet they are making categorical statements like there's no possible way that any of the machines were hacked. Well, we know just from looking at the machines, not just myself, but of course many other people like Alex Halderman and so forth, we know these machines are easily hacked. And so to say that it's impossible that any of these machines were hacked is just, it's a very strange statement for someone to make.
About electronic fingerprints in programs, just if that, in other words, is it conceivable, are you saying that there's evidence in electronic fingerprints that we could eventually track these people?
Yeah, so yeah, let me directly address that. So when you put a virus into a computer, when you modify software so it does something that you want it to do, that generally leaves droppings behind. And unless you've had many, many years and extensive practice with the very specific machine, the very specific software, and the trick that you're trying to do, you're pretty much guaranteed to leave droppings behind that someone who examines the computer will be able to see. And that's one of the reasons why Brent and Navo and myself are asking endlessly, please, may we do some forensic analysis on any random number of machines, because that will help us to see. Maybe we'll discover some droppings, maybe we'll understand.
Yeah. And this is
one last point I want to make very quickly. The next thing is that you would use the word fingerprint, and that's a very important word. We can, so one thing I said was if you modify the software, we may see evidence of that. Another thing we can do, especially with open source software, is we can determine what the software is supposed to look like when it's running in the machine. That itself is what we call a fingerprint. And then we can look at the software in the machine and see if those fingerprints match. And if they do match, then we know the software in the machine is the software that we think it is. And that gives us some modicum of security and safety in that way.
And we're asking for a complete new election because in this instance, if you allow people to obtain a benefit of having run a fraud, we're asking that the election be declared void ab initio. In other words, from the outset. If you allow them to stay in office and you say, well, we're going to take care of it so that there won't be a problem next time. It's like saying, well, you know, the bank got robbed this time, and those guys that took all that money are over there at the beach having a really good time and everything. Well, don't bother them, but we put a new alarm system in. So that's really what we're looking at here.
I want everybody to also realize, Kirsten, you really haven't spoken up about your own role in this. I mean, you've been in this since the beginning, and I think that people don't understand how much it has depended at different points of this case, especially early on, and here at this juncture, getting people together and organizing everything, and it's you. I mean, everybody on this team, all the women on this team have been great. But yeah, you've been in there as a founder and organizer, and I just think people ought to know that.
Thank you, and the chicks in the mail, Mark.
At a certain point, when the people of the United States find out that the solution systems were available and that we could have conducted the 2016 election on secure systems, but the corporate folks kept the solutions out of deployment and relegated us to using insecure systems that they knew were insecure, that the government studies showed were insecure, and that it is shown further that we were ringing all the alarms saying don't use these systems, that there are better ones available that can prevent against both insider and outsider intrusion, but nobody listened. They turned a deaf ear because of the corporate affectation of the political system. I think when the people find out more about this, there's going to be a lot of explaining to do and a major response. And so I think that us just keeping the science pushed forward, showing how human nature of the fact that people historically, if you allow them to affect an election and appropriately, they will do that. And the fact that scientifically these systems are vulnerable to that sort of manipulation, 2 and 2 still equals 4. It's almost common knowledge now, despite what Microsoft, NBC, MSNBC might portray, and despite what the major media may omit, we have enough data and enough information to conclude that these systems are certainly inappropriate, that we know that this particular election went wrong, and now we're just seeking the remedy. And I think your remedy of stating that one way to go is to redo the election, I think that makes sense. So I'll throw it over to Brian.
I did want to say one thing before Brian speaks, just to get out on the table. It's not popular to say this, but we need to be honest. The previous administration is also responsible because they were aware of this system. Is that not correct? They were aware of the problems, Brent, and they did nothing. I just wanted to be brave and put it out there because as much as a lot of us are missing the previous administration, they had a role in this as well.
That is correct. I personally briefed President Obama, then Senator Obama on this starting back in 2007. We stayed very focused on his administration. The Office of Science and Technology Policy was very well briefed in this. Ed Felton worked under Dr. John Holdren. They were aware. The Senate intelligence community certainly aware. Everybody's aware. So this is not, it might be America's dirty little secret, but the government is heightenedly aware.
Thank you. Brian?
Yes, and also I mentioned before that there's a lot of political force kind of stopping change from taking place. And much as I was a fan of the previous administration, Barack Obama stood there and said none of our machines were hacked. And I was shocked because, once again, he could not know that for a fact. So it was disturbing to me that keeping the status quo was so important that he would say something that he couldn't know for a fact. That disturbed me. So yes, we've had, Brent can tell you, I've built an open source voting system that we tested at Linux Expo in 2007, I believe, based upon some work that was done by PhDs at Berkeley and plus PhDs that I have in my organization. We built a working version of a complete open source voting system. So we demonstrated here's a way in which you can actually deliver lower cost, higher value, and more security in our election systems, and nobody really cares.
So it can be done. It's not it is rocket science. You guys have PhDs, but
it's voting science.
Go. In closing, given that the United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the following about Russian interference under oath on June 13, 2017, at a congressional investigative hearing, and I quote, "Such interference can never be tolerated. The Defense Department is required to identify weaknesses in our system and fix it. It's very disturbing that the Russians continue to push hostile actions in their foreign policy. We don't have a sufficient strategy to improve the technology. All of Congress is going to have to do better. So on behalf of our Revote 2017 team, NAVO technology experts, and all American citizens, we ask and expect Attorney General Jeff Sessions to order that all data and records of every USA voting machine and software manufacturer involved in the 2016 election be preserved and made available for a forensic analysis. Only then can we know to what degree Russian interference in the 2016 election actually did impact the actual voting machine results. Thank you.